What was the gossip concerning the Seaton case?
I'm not one to spread gossip to just anyone about a man as distinguished as Justice Wargrave. If I was certain about you, perhaps. But I'm not.
Any truth to the accusation against you?
It's a matter of interpretation, you understand. But I'd have to say, yes.
Will you tell me how it happened?
Elderly woman. Poor devil. I'd been up all night with an emergency case. My nerves were shot, hands shaking. But I had to operate. I had to try and save her. I had a pick-me-up or two to steady myself, but I bungled it. It wasn't the drink, I swear. It was an accident. Could have happened to anyone in my profession.
What brought you here to Shipwreck Island?
Owen sent me a note, asking me to have a look at his wife, who's been suffering from arthritis and muscle spasms.
Thank you for your time, Doctor. Any truth to the accusation against you?
The name sounded vaguely familiar. I expect it will come to me.
What brought you here to Shipwreck Island?
Got a wire from a pal of mine, Badger Barkley. Surprised me at the time because I had an idea the old horse had gone to Norway. Told me to roll up here.
Good evening, Mr. Master. Any truth to the accusation against you?
There isn't a word of truth in it. Miss Brady was always in poor health. Always. From the time we came to her.
Will you tell me how it happened?
There was a storm, as fierce as the one brewing outside right now when she was taken bad. The telephone was out of order. I went for the doctor on foot, but he got there too late.
Were you mentioned in the will?
Barely. Certainly not what we were led to believe. She was just saying it, you see, to ensure our devotion to her. Beg pardon. I'm not sure what came over me just then. The strain of tonight, I expect, and worry over Mrs. Rogers, of course.
What brought you here to Shipwreck Island?
Isn't that obvious, sir? My wife and I were hired through an agency in Plymouth. Manservant, housekeeper, cook, that's what we are.
Good evening, Mr. Rogers. Any truth to the accusation against you?
I remember Seaton perfectly well. Playwright, not a very good one. Charged with the murder of a chorus girl. He was very ably defended and made a good impression on the jury. Nevertheless, it was clear to me he'd done it.
Thank you kindly, Judge. Any truth to the accusation against you?
About that child, Cyril Hamilton. I was nursery governess to him.
Will you tell me how it happened?
I'd like to tell you. Cyril was forbidden to swim out far. One day, my attention was distracted. I couldn't get there in time. It was awful. But it wasn't my fault. At the inquest, the coroner exonerated me. Oh, and his mother. She was so kind. If she didn't blame me, why should this awful thing be said?
Are you sure you're telling me everything?
I'm telling you all I'm going to, Mr. Narracott.
What brought you here to Shipwreck Island?
I was engaged through an agency to be Mrs. Owen's secretary. Nothing remarkable in that, is there?
A good evening to you, Miss Claythorne. Stay safe. Any truth to the accusation against you?
Fellow got hold of a detestable rumor, nothing more. Arthur Richmond was one of my officers. I sent him on a reconnaissance, he was killed. Natural course of events in wartime.
Thank you, General.
Interesting history Shipwreck Island has. I'd studied up on it before I came down.
What are the names of those two people I'm accused of killing?
John and Lucy Combs. I made a note of it.
Must have been a couple of kids I ran over near Cambridge. Beastly bad luck.
For them or for you?
Well, I was thinking for me, but of course you're right, sir. It was damned bad luck on them. Of course it was a pure accident. They rushed out of some cottage or other. Beastly nuisance. English roads are hopeless, of course. Can't get up a decent pace on them. Well, anyway, it wasn't my fault. This man is dead.
Do you think it was suicide?
You conduct yourself well, Mr. Narracott, if you don't mind my saying so. Mr. Blore has told us that you are not what you appear, yet you told him you were not a detective.
No, sir. But I've read many detective novels. I even had one of those junior detective kits when I was a boy. Magnifying glass, fingerprint powder.
Junior detective kit. Wonderful.
Ah, an amateur sleuth, then. You appear to have something of a gift for it.
About the suicide, Judge.
I'm not yet prepared to offer an opinion.
Did you know Marston before he arrived here today?
I knew his father, the Duke, and his elder brother. Like so many younger sons of his class, Anthony Marsden was a bit of a wastrel, as you will have gathered. There were other rumors of late, of his dabbling in politics, but this is not the proper forum for that discussion.
What do you think that record means?
May I answer that in a moment after asking a question of my own?
Of course.
Does anyone know Mr. Owen's full name?
My letter was signed only U.N. Owen.
Yes, U.N. Owen. Or, by a slight stretch of fancy, unknown. I'll now answer your question, Mr. Narracott. The name, the recording, the circumstances under which all but you were lured to this island. I have no doubt in my mind that we have been invited here by a madman, very possibly a dangerous, homicidal lunatic.
Why did you retire, Judge?
I know there was talk about my competence, even my ego running wild, but the truth of it is very simple. My health. A lifetime sentencing my fellow man, and now a higher power has passed judgment on me.
I appreciate your candor, Judge. Did Marston choke to death?
You can call it choking if you like. He died of asphyxiation, right enough.
Was Marston poisoned?
Can't say exactly. Everything points to one of the cyanides. No distinctive smell of prussic acid. Probably potassium cyanide. It acts pretty well instantaneously.
Was there something in the whiskey?
Yes, without a doubt.
Do you think it was suicide?
Seems like it.
Could he have been murdered?
Not my line of country. I'm a doctor, not a detective.
Did you know Marston before he arrived here today?
Not I. Personally or professionally.
What do you think that record means?
A disgraceful and heartless practical joke, I suppose.
If you'll excuse me, Doctor. Do you think Marston committed suicide?
I shouldn't have said Mr. Marston was a suicidal type of gentleman at all.
Did you know Marston before he arrived here today?
Never clapped eyes on him. And who gave you the authority to question us?
You're under no obligation to answer me. What do you think that record means?
I don't like it. Not one bit. Very queer, the whole situation.
That is all for now, Mr. Blore. Do you think Marston committed suicide?
Yes. In my experience, certain types of individuals, when faced with their sin, will then commit the greater one.
Did you know Marston before he arrived here today?
No.
I overheard you mention St. Trednick to Miss Claythorne.
I was staying at a seaside hotel near St. Trednick this same week of August 4 years ago. That boy Cyril Hamilton drowned near there. It was the talk of the town. His half-brother was much older. Hugo, I think his name was. Cyril was a vile child, by all accounts, but first in line for the family title and estates. When he died, it all went to Hugo. He was just about Miss Claythorne's age. There was talk of something between them.
You're suggesting Vera let the boy drown so the man she loved could inherit?
That would be idle gossip. I don't indulge in idle gossip. I've only told you the facts of the case as I remember them.
What do you think that record means?
There is something very peculiar about it.
Good evening to you, Miss Brent. Do you think Marston committed suicide?
You'd never think he would kill himself. He was so alive. When he came down that hill in his car, he looked... Oh, I can't explain.
Did you know Marston before he arrived here today?
No. I'm sure I would have remembered.
Steady, Miss Claythorne. The lad had his faults, you know.
You seem to be a remarkably perceptive girl, Miss Claythorne.
Why, thank you, Mr. Narracott.
Is there anything you can tell me about our fellow castaways?
Castaways? You make it sound so...
Romantic?
I was going to say dramatic. Let me see. No one has confided any secrets to me, I'm afraid. Oh, except one.
That is...
I really don't know you well enough to answer you.
What do you think that record means?
It was unfair, what it said. Very unfair.
A pleasure as always, Miss Claythorne. Do you think Marston committed suicide?
He didn't seem particularly remorseful. Of course, the record might have set him off somehow. A new incident long after the fact may create a strong feeling of guilt or fear. Wouldn't you say, Doctor?
Possible. Quite possible.
Did you know Marston before he arrived here today?
Heard of him, but we'd never crossed paths or swords.
What do you think that record means?
There is something wrong with this entire weekend, and especially with our host, Mr. Owen.
I believe we're all coming around to that conclusion.
Yes, but I know something you don't, Judge.
What is that?
I recognize the voice on that recording, and it was definitely not Mr. Owen.
Who was it?
Not so fast, Narracott. Not until I think things through a bit more.
Thanks for your time, Mr. Longwell. Do you think it was suicide?
How dare you! My wife died of natural causes, sir. A long illness, nothing more.
I meant Marston.
Marston? No honor in him that I could see.
Did you know Marston before he arrived here today?
No, I don't think so. Not a military man, I'd wager. Lombard now. He reminds me of someone from my command. But the name wasn't Lombard.
What do you think that record means?
Ugly. After 30 years. Ugly thing to say.
Thank you, General.
Where have you been, Rogers?
I went to check on my wife, sir. She is resting comfortably. But I'm afraid I have some distressing news.
Oh?
One of the china figures of a sailor boy has been broken off.
Chapter 2. 9 little sailor boys sat up very late. One overslept himself, and then there were 8.
Filthy night. I tried to go out to get some more wood for the fire, but the wind drove me back.
A storm like that will keep us all indoors.
My apologies for the accommodations, Mr. Narracott, but all the beds are taken.
Makes one wonder where the Owens were planning to sleep, doesn't it?
A good servant follows instructions, sir. He does not question his employer, unless you'd like to share the deceased's room with the corpse.
This will do fine. Thank you, Rogers.
I'll wish you a good night then, sir.
Everyone should be sound asleep by now. Good time for a little stealth work. Nine little sailor boys.
Whoever it is, please leave us. My wife needs her rest.
Sorry about that, Rogers.
Not at all.
It's tightly locked. I can't open it. It's locked. He's as tight as an owl. I expect nothing could wake him up. Locked. I can't open it. It's locked. Morning is coming. I'd best get back to my bed. Well, I didn't get much rest, but at least I have something to show for it. I'd best see if everyone has come down for breakfast.
If what Narracott told Vera is true, and mind you, I take anything he says with a grain of salt, then they will not be sending a boat until at least Monday, even if the storm clears.
Wise to remember Narracott's the odd man out here.
Yes, thanks to you, I believe, Blore.
At least nothing else has occurred.
I hope you are correct, Miss Claythorne. However, I feel compelled to draw your attention to this table's centerpiece.
Now 2 are broken. How odd.
Ah, Mr. Narracott, good morning. Since Mr. Marsden won't be joining us, there is an extra place for breakfast, although breakfast itself seems to be a trifle behind schedule.
I'm afraid there is no breakfast at present. Mrs. Rogers has not been able to carry on this morning.
What's the matter with the woman? I was promised fresh apple juice this morning.
I must tell you a sad piece of news. Mrs. Rogers died in her sleep.
Did you hear anything in the night?
No, my sleep was quite restful.
Any theories about Mrs. Rogers' death?
She was a very skittish creature. And she had a shock last night. It might have been heart failure.
Her heart certainly failed to beat. What caused it to fail is the question.
Much obliged for your assistance, Miss Claythorne. Did you hear anything in the night?
I confess I slept fitfully. Marsden's death, the storm, but I heard nothing. Possibly also due to the storm.
Understandable, Judge. Quite understandable.
Mr. Narracott, can your boat be repaired?
I doubt very seriously it can be repaired. Mr. Blore did a good job.
Steady on. I didn't know then how the land lay, did I?
So you say.
If you find a means of leaving the island or of signaling the mainland, I'm sure we would all be in your debt.
And I'm sure all of us would help in any way we could.
Here.
We're never going to leave the island. None of us are ever going to leave.
What were you hinting at concerning Marsden's politics?
Only that he'd become mixed up with some foreigners. I think that's all I'd better say at present.
Any theories about Mrs. Rogers' death, Judge?
I'm afraid it confirms my opinion that there is something very wrong on this island. It occurs to me that if these 2 deaths were not suicides or accidents, that Mr. Owen may very well be responsible. If so, he is almost certainly on this island somewhere.
I agree. I think we should find a way off this island immediately.
Good day to you, Judge. Did you hear anything in the night?
No, although it appears I should have.
What was the cause of death?
Impossible to say offhand.
There must be an autopsy.
I certainly couldn't give a certificate without one.
Can you tell when she died?
Without an autopsy, not for certain, but it must have been some hours ago. The body was quite cold.
When did you find out?
Rogers roused me at first light. He'd gotten up to light the stove and see to the power generator before waking her. When she didn't respond, he got me.
Good day to you, Doctor. Did you hear anything in the night?
I'm a very light sleeper. In future, I hope everyone will bear that in mind. Yes, several times I heard something.
You didn't investigate?
With a judge, a detective, and an amateur sleuth in the house, you hardly need my poor skills in that line. I prefer to keep watch.
The hunter in his blind?
A good analogy, Judge.
Any theories about Mrs. Rogers' death?
We know that she consumed something last night. Dr. Armstrong told us so.
I, Mr. Lombard?
You gave her a sedative.
A small dose of Trianol, nothing more.
Doctors have made mistakes before.
You're suggesting I accidentally gave Mrs. Rogers an overdose?
Accidentally or otherwise. One death may have been an accident or suicide, but 2 in the space of a few hours?
Simply outrageous, man of my standing.
Any more questions, Mr. Narracott?
You said you recognized Owen's voice.
I've had time to think it over, and I'm sure I did. I see no reason to share that information with you.
Thanks for your time, Mr. Lombard. Any theories about Mrs. Rogers' death?
Conscience.
What do you mean by that?
She was accused, together with her husband, of having deliberately murdered her former employer, an old lady. You all saw her last night. She broke down completely. The shock of her wickedness brought home to her was too much to bear. She literally died of fear.
Possibly, if there was cardiac weakness.
Call it, if you prefer, an act of God.
That is all, Miss Brett. You're a detective, Mr. Bloor. Any theories?
I appreciate you recognizing the fact there's a professional present. I'd like to know what she had to eat or drink last night before she collapsed.
Rogers assures me she had nothing whatsoever.
Of course he would say that. But see here. They've done a murder and gotten away with it. Now she's all hysterical, likely to give the show away. She's a danger to her husband, that's what she is.
Oh, I should hardly think a man would do that to his wife.
You said you knew something about the history of this island.
Most of the old stuff can be found in the library. Its more recent history is just as interesting, though. But I'm not inclined to divulge that just yet.
That'll do, Mr. Bloor.
Perhaps this will grant the aging general increased mobility.
Any theories about Mrs. Rogers' death?
I'm sure Mrs. Rogers wasn't to blame. A good, loyal woman.
Did you hear anything in the night?
I thought I heard a voice calling my name. My wife, she died several years ago. I expect it was a dream.
General, you said you thought you recognized Lombard.
Lombard, yes. He does look familiar. But the name is wrong. Or is it? I'm sorry, young man. My memory plays tricks on me.
Thank you, General. Stay well.
Chapter 3. 8 little sailor boys traveling in Devon. One said he'd stay there, and then there were 7.
Rogers didn't let his wife's death get in the way of his custodial duties. I assume everyone has gone off on their own pursuits. I should do the same. Hello, Rogers.
Hello, sir. Was there anything you required?
Just looking around. That ham looks good.
Mrs. Rogers had a way with hams. Baked, boiled, fried, pickled, en casserole. Always a treat.
Have you noticed anything out of the ordinary since you arrived here, Rogers?
Just this, sir. This house is more like a museum than a residence. I've dusted every square inch, and I found articles left behind by many previous owners, including the Robsons, that actress, and even the Admiralty. The only owners who seem to have left no mark at all are Mr. and Mrs. Owen.
When will dinner be ready?
8 o'clock, sir, or close to it.
I appreciate your candor, Mr. Rogers.
I asked Rogers what this Miss Brady had suffered from. In a certain form of cardiac trouble, when an attack comes on, an ampule of amyl nitrate is broken and inhaled. If amyl nitrate were withheld...
I see. No positive action must be taken. No arsenic to obtain and administer. Nothing definite at all.
And nothing could be proved against Rogers or his wife.
It explains our situation here quite neatly. There are crimes that cannot be brought home to their perpetrators by the usual methods.
A judge taking advantage of his position? No offense, Judge.
A doctor under the influence letting a scalpel slip? No offense, Doctor. The point is, it explains Mr. Unknown. He has, for reasons only he knows, decided to seek justice for certain crimes as he sees them.
And who among us is the only one that stands unaccused?
Ah, Mr. Narracott, right on cue.
Have you seen any of the others?
Before we came in here, I saw Miss Brent knitting on the patio as if she hadn't a care in the world.
How much Trianol is missing from your supply?
I wouldn't know. I left the bottle with Rogers in case his wife required a second draft.
Could you perform an autopsy on Mrs. Rogers?
I could, sir, but I won't. As Mr. Lombard so helpfully pointed out, it might be thought I had something to do with her death. It would be unethical for me to operate.
Good day to you, Doctor. Have you seen any of the others?
I believe Mr. Blore and Mr. Lombard are off searching the island for Mr. Owen.
You think they'll find Mr. Owen?
Not in the sense you mean.
You didn't want to join them?
They are men accustomed to physical activity. I prefer to search for the truth with my mind.
Me too.
Any idea how we can get off the island?
I've allowed you to continue your own investigations, Mr. Narracott, because I disagree that being the odd man out makes you more suspect. On the contrary. But I've given you a good deal of advice already. It would be well if you thought for yourself for a while and let us get on with our game.
Where would you search for Mr. Owen?
Closer to home.
Thank you kindly, Judge. It's locked fast. That shipwreck island. Those currents appear quite deadly. Property of Teresa Robson. I transcribed the interesting passages into my notebook.